If the title wasn't a big giveaway, I really like the Sumeru Archon quest. It provided a massive improvement from the last major Archon quests that I believe were missing from Genshin Impact, and even more so in the last two Archon quests previously. I won't be going into the lore reasons why I think this Archon quest is great, because trust me, there's a lot, but I'm saving that for another video. I'll just be listing my top reasons narratively why I love this Archon quest and why I think this is a major improvement for Genshin's overall storytelling qualities. Also, since I want to discuss improvements, I will not be isolating these arguments to just the Sumeru Archon quest, but also referencing the weaker elements of the previous Archon quests that I believe were greatly addressed here. It is impossible to say that there's improvement now if there wasn't a problem before, that's just irresponsible criticism. You have been warned. Number 1. The story took its time, but didn't waste its time. Show don't tell is an important motif that I repeated throughout the course of my critique of the Inazuma Archon quest. A critique that I am proudly and happily not going to repeat here. The Sumeru Archon quest is objectively the longest out of all the 4, and while some people might say that's a bad thing, the Archon quest itself doesn't waste its time establishing the integral motifs of the story. The concept of cycles, the monopolization of information, the academic gap between the eremites and the academia, and even important callbacks that serve integral parts in the last cutscenes. The story took its time establishing its characters and didn't just streamline us through the crucial characters for the sake of keeping the story moving. Important characters are given their time to shine, and we actually see important conversations play through instead of being told that they're happening. This is a crucial improvement because up until this Archon quest, we have been playing through the eyes of the traveler. We have been told that people talk to each other or have been withheld information for so long. You cannot tell me that when this scene happened, you weren't terribly worried that it's just going to fade to black and we wake up all fine and dandy, without actually knowing what Dottore and Nahida talked about. In this Archon quest, we as players get to see how trades actually play out, and what the characters have been cooking behind the scenes. This makes the payoff so much better, and ultimately more satisfying because we see the progression. Additionally, we see the characters use their resources and intelligence to their advantage while actually making a creative plan that plays through their strengths. Something that we actually haven't seen all too strongly with the other characters in other Archon quests, especially characters that are supposed to be strategists. I was actually so worried all throughout the story that characters like Tignari and Dia would be shrugged off despite having strong connections to the groups. But I'm very glad that we don't just leave them in the dust in the first act. Even Nilou, who is a side character all things considered. The story took its time and cultivated everything it needed without making us go through a lousy fetch quest trying to grab perfume for somewhere. The flow of the story wasn't completely smooth, but it was coherent enough that it never left lingering questions. It ended when it needed to end, and all the major players got their time to shine. From Kale and the Withering Zones to the Samsara cycle, to the introduction of the Doctor and the Balladeer, to the Eremite situation with the Scarlet King, to the final showdown and the execution. The Archon quest really just feels so action-packed. The Archon quest just feels complete with a lingering side of lore, of course. I mean, all Archon quests have that. But it doesn't feel like there are any more loose threads and no more what-ifs that we need to answer. Number 2. The antagonists feel real and despicable. This is an improvement that I think needs more explanation. I believe that antagonists can have nuances, and that not all antagonists are vile and villainous. The problem is that if all of your major and present antagonists play this role, then the writing becomes monotonous because the story almost always expects you to have a level of sympathy for them, and that feelings of retribution, judgment, and justice become contaminated or even downright muted for the sake of showcasing the antagonist as sympathetic. This is what happened with Dvalin and A. The problem with this kind of storytelling is that it's supposed to be nuanced, not constant. That's what makes the Academia and the Fatui Harbingers here really different. Most of the time in the previous Archon quests, the characters don't harbor immense hate, but instead pity them or have forgiven them despite the damage. Again, this isn't always bad antagonist writing, but it can't be your franchise's only antagonist writing, especially if other antagonists aren't as present in the story and they're just one-off glorified cameos at some point. Hate And anger is a powerful effect that cements urgency and drive. It is a crucial narrative emotion that greatly impacts storytelling because you need to give the heroes an emotional reason to care for their goal in the first place. Spite is a really powerful motivator, and this is well executed in the Sumeru Archon quest. All three antagonist groups feel present and just give you a reason to get pissed off, to give you a sense of urgency to actually save Sumeru instead of going on another shopping spree. Even Dottore, who would usually just be the one of Harbinger for the Archon quest, had a really strong presence because he actively antagonized Tignari and Nahida in the middle of the story, and established himself as a stronger potential threat by actually showing the conversation between himself and Nahida in the end parts. This is contradictory to what happened with Scaramouche and Miko in the Inazuma Archon quest. The Sumeru antagonists just feel more active and consistent. They give you a present and visible reason to beat them up, and are an actual threat to society. Number 3. The cinematic elements in regular cutscenes improved drastically. I'm not just talking about the fully rendered ones. What I mean is the regular dialogue that we have. Genshin has shown that it has a limited animation palette, with most characters having emotions and animations grabbed from a predetermined pool. Which isn't a bad thing, of course. That's just standard RPG dialogue cutscenes. But Genshin has been very creative with their cutscenes as of late. The camera movement, the gradients, the tints to indicate memory, the blur. This Archon quest really took its cinematic elements to another level. Kudos to them. Also, the fight scene at the end was super fucking cool. You know, an actual fight scene, unlike people just transforming. It just feels really nice to have a cutscene in Genshin. Genshin's fight choreography is always just so good that it's criminal to see that it's rarely animated. Anyway, number 4. The pacing and the flow of the story is non-linear. This was a point that I really wanted to make that I genuinely think is important to why Sumeru's Archon quest just feels nice. We don't abandon major players after their specific act, and antagonists actually do things in the middle part of the story. If you notice how Genshin's old Archon quests are, they tend to follow a linear structure in which we get a line of characters, but promptly discard them as the quest goes on. They mostly only return for a cutscene once their contribution is done, and we don't get to see them grow or interact further in the story. This is also applicable to certain antagonists, like Scaramouche in the Inazuma Archon quest, and Senora in all of them. They show up and they're gone. Protagonist-wise, this was most evident with Amber, Kaya, and Lisa, Xiao and the Adepti, then Kokomi and Kazuho were teased in the art of the Archon quest as important. That's a fine story progression, especially since you have a massive cast. Not everyone can shine, of course, but doing this too much can weaken character developments by a lot. The Sumeru Archon quest also removes side characters when it has to, like Hale, Dunyarzad, and even at some point, Nilou for the mid-act. But they do it smartly. They are removed because they are not massive players, but those that require development like Sino, Alhaitham, Dia, and even Tignari are present for a considerable amount of time. The villains and their plots are also given light in the middle parts of the Archon quest, not at the end. This makes them feel more present and an active threat that needs to be stopped. One thing that I did want to say is that I find it interesting that Scaramouche's cutscene is played in the middle of the quest, unlike A's that was played at the end of it. This sets up two different tones. On one hand, you have a clean cutscene that leaves no room for negotiation because you just finished beating A up. Reconciliation is much easier now that you understand that A wasn't doing this out of completely negative motivations, but was just a victim of circumstance. On the other hand, Scaramouche having his backstory in the middle gives a subtle moral conflict. Yes, we saw that this puppet had grief and was abandoned, but that same puppet is going through the entirety of Sumeru right now and we still need to beat them up. The cutscene serves as an explanation, but nothing more than that. The traveler doesn't completely forgive them or completely feel sympathetic because why would they? Their obligation is to Sumeru, not to whatever sob story Scaramouche has in the middle of the story. Scaramouche is an active threat. The cutscene was the past, and what matters is the present that they still need to deal with him. I just thought that was interesting, that things are being put in the middle of the story because it has been a really big problem in the previous Archon quests, that really big things would just happen at the end, why the middle was horribly bare bones. And speaking of the Traveler, number 5. The Archon quest gives the information payoff the Traveler deserves. The amount of payoff this Archon quest gave is massive. The lore is just so extensive and the amount of teaser questions in the end just feels great. Also, kudos to Nahida for being the most pog Archon and actually giving us the information we need. I know that the Archons have their own reasons, but damn, does it just feel nice to finally be given something after the Archon quest, you know? Something that actually justifies a traveler's motivation of not only finding their sibling, but also finding the truth of this world and helping the nations. Good gravy. And that's it! As for my criticisms, narratively of course, the story of Genshin still follows the same RPG cliches, but honestly, I don't mind. There are some story beats that I think weren't further explained. First of all was the Wall of Samael, and the other was the Ain al-Khamar, or how the Balladeer even got to Sumeru, or why he teamed up with the Torre, or what was hidden in the Balladeer's past that was supposed to be erased. But it's neither here nor there, honestly, it's just nitpicking at that point. They're not particularly impactful in the grander schemes of the plot, and I think that's fine. The story of Genshin is just a standard hero's journey, where the good guys always win and everything goes smoothly. Cliché, yes, but at this point it's just a matter of Genshin's stylistic choice to be somewhat of a tame story, narratively. But nevertheless, this Archon quest was just great. I would love to experience it again for the first time and replay it. But alas, memories come and go. Anyway, my name is Aston, thank you for chilling with me. What are your thoughts on the Sumeru Archon quest? Did you like it? Out of 10, what would you give it? I'd give it an 8.5. Anyway, bye-bye!